They laughed when a black boy was forced to perform at school on a violin he didn't even know how to hold. They thought it would humiliate him. What they didn't expect was that inside that old violin case, he would discover something greater than talent. He would awaken a legacy. And when he stepped on that stage, silence would fall, not out of fear, but respect. Dear viewer, don't miss this powerful story about hidden talent and justice. And if this is your first time watching one of my videos, I humbly ask you to comment where you're watching from, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story published daily. Thank you. And now, let's dive into the full story. The school auditorium at Fairmount High in Charleston, South Carolina, buzzed with the monotone echoes of morning announcements, teachers' instructions, and the occasional rustle of restless students shifting in their chairs. Principal Lillian Brooks stood on the stage, crisp in her navy pantsuit, her expression tightly composed beneath a veneer of professional politeness. She scanned the crowd with calculating eyes, always on the lookout for a moment to assert her control. Her gaze landed on a boy standing in the far corner, hands in his pockets, back against the wall, his broad shoulders slumped slightly. Elijah Carter, 17, quiet, reserved, black. Elijah Carter. Her voice rang sharply through the auditorium. It sliced through the air like a whip. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Why aren't you seated with your class? Elijah hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, as dozens of eyes zeroed in on him. He shifted his weight and replied with a voice more steady than he felt. My back's been hurtin'. The seats aggravate it. Principal Brooks smiled thinly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Back pain, she repeated with exaggerated disbelief. I suppose the rules don't apply to back pain. No, ma'am. But she had already moved on, stepping down from the stage with deliberate, echoing heels. As she neared Elijah, she spotted something next to his feet. A violin case, worn at the edges, the kind most students carried between music class and after-school practice. And what is this? She asked, her voice syrupy sweet, but everyone could sense the trap in it. It's my cousin's, Elijah explained. I'm just holding it for her until orchestra practice. A musical man, are you? She said, voice tightening. Well then, perhaps you'd like to showcase your talent at next week's spring assembly. Elijah blinked, confused. Ma'am, I don't... She didn't let him finish. You'll perform a solo, on this violin, right here in front of the entire school. She turned to face the auditorium. Let this serve as a reminder. Fairmount holds its students to the same standards. No exceptions. Laughter rippled through the room like a cruel wind. I don't even know how to play, Elijah said quietly. Then I suggest, Principal Brooks replied, you learn quickly. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a sentence. The moment the bell rang and students began to file out, Elijah remained frozen. His chest tightened. His ears burned. He could feel the stares, the snickers, the sideways glances. The violin case felt heavier in his hands now, like it carried not just wood and string, but shame. Outside the auditorium, his cousin Jada ran up to him. What the hell just happened? She's making me perform, as a punishment. Jada's eyes widened in outrage. You're not even in music class. You've never touched a violin before. Apparently, that's the point. Elijah didn't want to talk about it. The injury that had kept him from sitting comfortably for weeks, something no one had cared to ask about, had just been twisted into an opportunity for public spectacle. He walked home in silence, violin case in one hand, shame in the other. That evening, as his mother applied balm to the inflamed bruise along his lower back, she said nothing at first, but her jaw was tight, her breath short, her fury visible even in the quiet of their modest living room. "She made you what?" she finally asked. "She said it would teach me respect." His mother looked at him long and hard, then stood and retrieved a dusty old photo album from the hallway closet. She flipped through the pages until she found it, a photo of Elijah's father, standing tall in a pressed white shirt, holding a violin. "You never told me Dad played," Elijah said, stunned. "He did. He played beautifully," she said, her voice catching, "until the factory job broke his fingers and his spirit." Elijah stared at the photo, something stirring inside him. Not anger, not sadness, something else. Why'd he never teach me? He wanted to, but he was gone before he could. The silence between them was thick. Elijah looked down at the violin case and then back at the photo. Something about the way his father cradled the instrument, gentle, reverent, felt important. He opened the case slowly. The violin inside looked like any other. Wooden, unassuming. But holding it in his hands felt like touching a part of a history he never knew was his. "I don't know how to play," he said. "No one does, until they try." The next day, Elijah didn't speak to anyone at school. He sat through his classes distracted, fingers tapping invisible strings against his desk. During lunch, he found an empty classroom, opened the case, and simply held the violin. The bow felt awkward. His posture was wrong. Every sound he made was shrill and off-key, but he didn't stop. That afternoon, he returned to the same room. Again the next day, and the day after. On the fifth day, Jada found him in that room, hunched over the violin. "You're really going to do it?" she asked. "I don't have a choice." "You do. You could refuse." He looked at her. The soft brown of his eyes hardened into resolve. "That's what she expects. But I want to do more than just prove her wrong. I want to prove me right." Jada paused, then nodded. "Then I'll help you." Elijah smiled for the first time all week. In that moment, a punishment had begun to transform into purpose. And while Principal Brooks had intended to make an example of him, she had no idea what kind of example he was about to become. What began as public humiliation was about to become something far more powerful, something unforgettable. Because sometimes the most beautiful music begins with a broken note. The first time Elijah Carter played a full scale without flinching at the sound, it was just past midnight on a Thursday. He sat cross-legged on the worn rug in his bedroom, the violin balanced awkwardly on his shoulder. His mother had gone to bed hours earlier, after another 12-hour shift at the hospital. Outside, Charleston's humid summer night was thick with the hum of cicadas. But inside his small room, only the uncertain strain of music broke the silence. Each note wobbled, imperfect, hesitant, but something was taking shape. That same night, unable to sleep, Elijah pulled the photo of his father from the kitchen shelf and stared at it under the yellow desk light. His father had been younger than Elijah was now when that picture was taken. His grip on the violin loose and natural, a man at ease with something that clearly meant the world to him. His mother's voice from earlier still echoed in his mind. He wanted to teach you, but the world wouldn't let him. The next morning, Elijah asked his mom something he hadn't asked in years. "Did he record anything?" She paused. "There's one old tape, somewhere." It took an hour to find the old cassette box, tucked away in the garage among dusty tax files and baby clothes. Elijah slid the tape into the player with shaking hands. As the wheels spun and static hissed, a melody floated out, gentle, warm, deliberate. Elijah didn't recognize the piece, but it stopped him cold. It wasn't just beautiful, it was personal, as if the music was speaking directly to him across time, as if his father were right there in the room with him, guiding his fingers, correcting his bow hold, urging him not to give up. And in that moment, everything changed. This wasn't about Principal Brooks anymore. This was legacy. That weekend, Jada returned with sheet music printed from the school's orchestra files, a metronome app on her phone, and a clipboard full of handwritten practice exercises. Despite her age, she'd been trained classically since she was 7. "If you're going to do this, you need to do it right," she said. They started small: scales, string crossings, simple rhythms. But Elijah's ability to retain pitch startled her. "You're playing by ear," Jada said, after he reproduced a melody she'd only hummed once. "You've got something you can't teach." Elijah blinked. "You think so?" "I know so," she said. "It's like the music's already inside you. You're just learning how to bring it out." But not everyone was impressed. Word had spread around the school, thanks, no doubt, to Principal Brooks's deliberate announcement over the intercom. "Special solo performance by Elijah Carter," she had said with a smile too wide, "inspired by his recent behavioral correction. Translation: come watch this kid fail." By Monday, whispers followed him in the hallways. "Bet he can't even tune the thing. Must be punishment violin now." Some students laughed. Some looked confused. A few showed sympathy. But none of it mattered to Elijah. What mattered was that, after years of feeling unseen, he now had something that made him feel alive. During lunch that week, Elijah started using an empty storage room near the janitor's office for practice. It was dark, dusty, and smelled faintly of bleach, but it was private. And in that quiet space, the notes grew clearer, his form more natural. But he needed more. That Thursday, he finally worked up the courage to approach someone he'd avoided until now. Mr. Dempsey, the orchestra director, was a tall, quiet man, known for his high standards and low tolerance for mediocrity. His classroom was a sanctuary of discipline and sound, where sheet music was scripture and tempo sacred. Elijah stepped in timidly after school, violin case in hand. "I'm not part of your class," he began, "but I need help." Dempsey looked up from his desk, surprised. "Elijah, right?" "Yes, sir." "I heard you're performing at the spring assembly." Elijah nodded, embarrassment rising. Dempsey sighed. "I don't condone what Principal Brooks did, but you stepping up? Now that takes something." Elijah opened the case. "I want to learn. I've got a week." Dempsey's brow rose. "1 week? I've been practicing." The teacher gestured to the music stand. "Let's see what you've got." Elijah positioned the violin under his chin, hands trembling slightly, and began to play the opening of Meditation from Thais, a piece Jada had introduced him to because of its emotional range and graceful phrasing. The first few notes cracked. One bow stroke missed its mark. But as he moved through the opening bars, something happened. His sound, though unpolished, carried a rawness, a quiet depth that wasn't taught, but felt. When he stopped, Mr. Dempsey was silent. Then he said, "Your technique needs work. Your bowing is inconsistent." But, but, Elijah asked, holding his breath. "You have soul," Dempsey said. Most students don't get that until their third year. If you want, I'll work with you. Every day. We'll make something real out of this. From that point on, every evening was a lesson. Mr. Dempsey adjusted Elijah's grip, corrected his wrist, drilled him on phrasing. Jada continued helping at home, while Elijah's mother stayed up late, listening from the hallway as her son played until his fingers ached. "Your father would be proud," she whispered once through the door. But the real test was coming. The night of the concert drew closer, and with each day, Elijah felt the pressure mount. Students walked past him with smirks. Ms. Langford, his history teacher, asked him in front of the class, "Will you be wearing a tuxedo, or will sweatpants suffice for the punishment performance?" Even that didn't stop him. By Saturday, Elijah could play the first half of Meditation from memory. Mr. Dempsey sat at the piano in the practice room, eyes closed as Elijah played. When the final note rang out, the teacher leaned back and said, "It's not perfect, but it's honest. And that, Elijah, that's music." Elijah exhaled, sweat clinging to his brow. "Will it be enough?" Mr. Dempsey looked at him, and for the first time, smiled. "It already is." What had started as a joke had become a spark, and soon it would become a fire no one could extinguish. The night of the spring assembly arrived cloaked in heavy Charleston heat, the kind that clings to your skin like anticipation. Inside the Jefferson High School auditorium, the air buzzed with something else: rumor, expectation, and a very specific kind of curiosity. The audience filled quickly: students, parents, teachers, and, notably, the district superintendent and 2 members of the school board. Principal Brooks had invited them personally. She was smiling more than usual that evening, relishing the final act of what she had quietly described as a restorative disciplinary showcase. She expected failure, and failure, to her, would serve a purpose. Backstage, Elijah sat alone in the green room, violin resting in his lap, hands trembling. His suit, borrowed from his late uncle and just a bit too large, itched at the collar. The lights outside the curtain were dimming. The show had begun. One by one, the acts went on. The choir, the school band, a dramatic monologue from the theater club. But none stirred quite as much reaction as the announcement everyone had been waiting for. "For our final performance this evening," Principal Brooks said from the stage, her voice carrying the controlled glee of someone presenting a magic trick they believed was about to fail. "We bring you a special surprise, a solo by one of our most unexpectedly musical students, Elijah Carter." A polite smattering of applause followed, laced with confusion. Backstage, Elijah's knees nearly buckled. "You're ready?" Mr. Dempsey whispered beside him. "You know the music. You have something to say. Go say it." Jada appeared from the wings, offering a nod and a quiet, "You got this." Elijah looked at her, then at the instrument in his hands. It didn't feel foreign anymore. It felt like memory, like defiance, like truth. He stepped into the spotlight. For a moment, the crowd murmured. Phones came out. Some students leaned forward, smirking. But as Elijah raised the violin to his shoulder and drew the bow across the strings, all of that melted into a single, breath-held silence. The first notes of meditation from Thais floated into the room. There was a hesitation in the beginning, fingers too tight, a slight screech on the bow. But then it settled, and when it did, the room changed. Elijah's sound, raw and imperfect, was undeniably alive. He poured everything into it: the humiliation of being mocked, the sting of being underestimated, the memory of his father's face, the quiet encouragement of his mother's hands. With each passing note, his body leaned into the music. The audience forgot this was supposed to be a joke. Forgotten was the label of detention substitute or troubled kid. In its place stood something impossible to categorize: a young man speaking through a violin with the emotional weight of a storm. The vibrato shook softly. His phrasing was tender, but deliberate, like he was unspooling a secret. Every flaw in his technique was outshined by the sheer sincerity in his sound. He played like someone discovering who he was in real time and letting everyone bear witness to the awakening. When he hit the climactic swell, something incredible happened. Someone in the crowd audibly gasped, not in mockery, but awe. In the front row, Principal Brooks's proud expression cracked into something uncertain. Ms. Langford, his history teacher, blinked twice and leaned forward. And behind them, Elijah's mother stood up slowly, hands covering her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The final note lingered in the air like smoke. Then silence. Then suddenly, thunderous applause. People rose to their feet. Some students screamed his name. A few even whistled. Elijah lowered his violin slowly, chest rising with disbelief. He had not just survived. He had shattered every expectation in that room. He had arrived. Backstage, Mr. Dempsey met him with glassy eyes and a steady hand. That, he said simply, was more than music. Jada rushed to his side, wrapping him in a hug that nearly knocked the violin from his hands. "You were brilliant," she whispered. I don't know what just happened," Elijah said, dazed. "You told the truth," Mr. Dempsey said, "and people listened." But the story wasn't finished. As the audience dispersed, something unusual happened. A man in a sharp navy suit approached the stage, flanked by one of the school board members. He asked to speak to Elijah privately. His name was Dr. Benjamin Hartley, Director of Outreach for the Charleston Conservatory of Music. "I saw something rare tonight," Dr. Hartley said. "Not polish, not perfection, but purpose. With the right training, Elijah, you could go far." Elijah stared at him. "You mean, like, study?" "I mean scholarships, mentorship, a pathway, if you're willing to work." At the edge of the room, Principal Brooks watched the interaction unfold, her face drained of color. Her plan to shame Elijah had just turned into the most triumphant moment of his life, and everyone saw it. And still, the ripples kept spreading. The next day, a video of Elijah's performance, uploaded anonymously, went viral within the school. Then the city. Within 3 days, local news had picked up the story. Student turned punishment into performance of a lifetime. Comments poured in. Strangers sent messages of support. Former students of Jefferson High shared their own stories of being silenced or discouraged, and now inspired. Teachers from other districts reached out to offer help. Musicians offered free lessons. Elijah's inbox became a symphony of hope, and with it, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't a moment. This was a movement. The day after the performance, Jefferson High felt different. The halls, usually filled with indifferent chatter and the static noise of routine, now hummed with something sharper. Conversation stopped when Elijah walked past, not in mockery this time, but in stunned silence or hushed admiration. Some students clapped him on the back. Others offered small smiles. A few simply nodded, unsure of what to say, but sensing something significant had happened. Elijah didn't know how to feel about the attention. He'd never asked for a spotlight. All he wanted was to be seen as more than a problem. But now, he was more than a name on a disciplinary sheet. He was a symbol, and that was heavier than applause. By third period, his name had made the local news. That afternoon, Principal Brooks called an emergency faculty meeting. She entered the teacher's lounge with her usual poise, but something about her felt off, less polished, more careful. "We've received inquiries," she began, "from several media outlets regarding the spring assembly and Mr. Carter's performance. Let's remember to direct all comments through the district's PR department. We don't want misinformation to spiral out of control." Several teachers exchanged looks. Mr. Dempsey raised a hand. "Shouldn't we be asking a more important question? Like why this performance had to come from punishment in the first place?" A few teachers nodded. One brave science teacher, Ms. Alvarez, added, "Or why no one ever asked what Elijah was going through until now." Principal Brooks didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was tight. "This isn't the time for criticism. The assembly was a structured opportunity for creative growth." "You mean public humiliation," someone muttered. But the tides were already shifting. That evening, the video of Elijah's performance hit 1.2 million views. People weren't just watching, they were talking. Comment threads lit up with stories from other students in other schools who had felt silenced, underestimated, or cast aside. Elijah's story struck a nerve not just because of the music, but because it revealed what so many had experienced: the subtle cruelty of low expectations. And the reckoning began. At the next school board meeting, parents filled the room. Not just Elijah's mother, but mothers and fathers of other Black students, Latino students, students with learning differences, and students from low-income families who'd been punished more often, graded more harshly, or passed over entirely. One by one, they stood and spoke. Mrs. Carter, holding Elijah's violin case in her lap, addressed the board last. "My son didn't become gifted overnight," she said. "He was always that child. What changed is someone finally saw it and didn't try to shame it out of him." Her words landed like thunder. The board ordered an independent equity audit of Jefferson High. They launched an investigation into disciplinary patterns, staff conduct, and the alternative punishment initiative that had somehow passed administrative approval. Principal Brooks's once unshakable authority was now under scrutiny. She'd built her reputation on control, but the control was slipping. 2 weeks later, the district superintendent made an unannounced visit to the school. In the presence of staff, students, and community leaders, he called Elijah to the front of the auditorium and handed him a certificate, not just of recognition for his performance, but of acknowledgement. A formal apology from the district was read aloud, citing a failure to recognize and cultivate the potential of every student equally. When Elijah stepped up to the mic, he didn't speak right away. He stared at the sea of faces, the ones who had judged, ignored, laughed, and took a deep breath. "I'm not here because I'm special," he said quietly. "I'm here because I was given a chance to show something I didn't even know was in me. Everyone in this school deserves that chance, not just when it's convenient, not just when it's safe, but always." The room stood still, and then it erupted. But the applause wasn't just for the performance anymore. It was for the truth, the courage, the clarity. Later that week, Elijah was invited to speak on a local radio show about his journey. When asked what he hoped people would take away, he paused before answering, "I hope we stop seeing discipline as a way to make kids smaller." I hope we stop thinking silence means there's nothing to say. And I hope educators start asking themselves what they're missing by assuming too much and listening too little. His words weren't angry, they were honest, and honesty resonates. Mr. Dempsey began holding lunchtime music workshops for students who couldn't afford private lessons. Jada started a student-led mentorship group to help younger kids build confidence through the arts. And Elijah, now seen as more than a name on a class roster, was invited to perform at the Charleston Youth Symphony's Spring Gala. But the biggest change came not from policy, but from perspective. Teachers began looking differently at the quiet ones, the rowdy ones, the students who never raised their hands. They asked more questions. They listened more carefully. They stopped treating creativity as a reward and started seeing it as a right. And maybe that's what real reckoning looks like. Not just the fall of those who got it wrong, but the rising of those ready to do better. Weeks had passed since Elijah's performance first shook the walls of Jefferson High, yet its impact continued to ripple outward like waves stirred by a single note. What had started as a calculated act of humiliation had become something far more powerful, a catalyst for transformation, not only within the school, but in the hearts of those who once dismissed voices like his. For Elijah, life didn't return to normal. It became something different, something fuller. He still woke early every morning, but now his hands reached for the violin with purpose. What once felt like a borrowed instrument had become a part of him, a channel for emotion he couldn't always put into words. Music wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a choice. It was his. His story had traveled further than he could have imagined. It was featured on local news, then national outlets. Emails arrived from strangers who saw in him a reflection of their own struggles. Students who had been silenced. Parents who had feared their children would never be seen for who they were. Teachers who realized, too late, that they'd overlooked brilliance hidden behind defiance or silence. Elijah tried to respond to as many messages as he could, but it wasn't the attention that changed him. It was the realization that what he had endured, what he had risen above, wasn't just about him. His story had become a mirror. And now, more people were looking into it, asking harder questions. Back at Jefferson High, the air had shifted. The new principal, Dr. Clarice Monroe, was a quiet force, a former teacher herself, with roots in the same community many of her students came from. One of her first decisions was to implement a restorative justice model, replacing the school's harsh disciplinary policies with a system rooted in empathy, accountability, and understanding. But even more transformative was the creation of the Elijah Initiative, a new school-wide program dedicated to discovering and nurturing hidden talents in students through the arts. Funded through both district resources and community support, the initiative offered free music, art, and creative writing workshops during and after school hours, especially targeted at students who had never been given access before. Elijah wasn't just the namesake. He became its first mentor. Twice a week, he met with younger students, some shy, some rebellious, some labeled troublemakers, and helped them find their voice, not just through music, but through presence. He didn't preach. He listened. And when he played, they listened too, not because he demanded their respect, but because he had earned it. One afternoon, a seventh grader named Micah came to the workshop, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He didn't want to be there. Said music was for soft kids. But Elijah handed him a violin anyway. No pressure. Just hold it. Micah did. And something in his posture changed. Slightly. Barely. But enough to know something had taken root. That's what change looked like now. Not in grand announcements, but in small moments. A spark here, a shift there, and one by one, seeds were planted. Outside the school walls, Elijah had received a full scholarship to the Charleston Conservatory's summer program. Mr. Dempsey, now acting head of the music department, beamed with pride every time he spoke of Elijah's progress. And Mrs. Carter, who had once worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, now watched her son's journey unfold with a kind of reverent awe. Before leaving for the conservatory, Elijah stood once again on the same auditorium stage where it all began. This time, the spotlight felt less like pressure and more like possibility. He looked out over the students, the teachers, the community members who had supported him, doubted him, or learned from him. "This isn't just about me," he said, violin resting calmly by his side. "This is about what happens when you give someone a chance, a real one." And in the quiet after his words, you could feel it, something shifting in every heart present. A recognition, a promise. What began with a violin played in defiance had become a symphony of change, and the music was only just beginning. Elijah Moore's journey began with a cruel intention disguised as discipline. A young black student at Jefferson High, he was thrust into the spotlight, not to shine, but to stumble. Told to play the violin as punishment for what was framed as insubordination, Elijah was meant to be humiliated before his peers, a warning wrapped in mockery. But instead of breaking under the weight of shame, Elijah rose, not out of rebellion, but from a quiet place of resilience, history, and purpose he didn't even know he carried. In discovering the violin, Elijah unearthed more than a talent. He reconnected with a legacy. His late father, once a gifted musician, had left behind not just an instrument, but an inheritance of strength and artistry. With the help of allies like Mr. Dempsey and his best friend Ava, Elijah transformed a weapon of ridicule into a voice of defiance, grace, and truth. What followed was more than redemption. It was revelation. Elijah's performance didn't just shock his school. It rewrote the script. It exposed injustice, challenged bias, and reminded everyone that genius doesn't always wear a uniform or speak in rehearsed tones. It can show up in the most unexpected places, wearing pain as armor and silence as survival. But most importantly, Elijah's story sparked change. From the introduction of the Elijah Initiative to the reshaping of school policies and attitudes, his experience became the seed of something far greater. What started as a singular act of courage blossomed into a movement, a space for other unheard voices to be nurtured, not silenced. So what's the lesson here? It's this: never underestimate the power of a single spark. One voice, one act, one truth, spoken in courage, can change an entire system. Elijah teaches us that even when the world tries to define you by your silence, your rebellion, or your color, your worth is not up for negotiation. When given, or when claiming, a space to be seen, heard, and respected, something extraordinary can emerge. And for each of us, that means something powerful. Whether you're a student, a parent, a teacher, or simply someone who's ever been overlooked, this story is a reminder. The thing meant to break you might just be the thing that reveals your purpose. If Elijah's journey moved you, inspired you, or gave you something to think about, Don't let it end here. Help us continue to shine a light on stories that matter, voices that need to be heard, and change that needs to happen. Subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Because stories like Elijah's aren't just entertainment, they're a call to action. And together, we can make sure no student is ever told their voice doesn't matter again.